Sup, and welcome to a random review, where today I'm reviewing something extremely random, something I only watched out of sheer curiosity, My Son Hunter, a fictional movie about Hunter Biden and his eventual presidential father Joe Biden, that was produced and portrayed exclusively by conservatives who, hated the Bidens and wanted to make them look bad, which is why this movie was also distributed by Breitbart, a far-right website. And this was released in 2022 with a budget of $2.8 million, which is nothing. Now, ordinarily, I would never in a million years watch this, for reasons that, if they're not already obvious, will be obvious very soon. But I watched this because I saw the trailer for this movie when it came out, and it looked so awful that it made me wonder, what exactly went into this movie? I knew it was obviously going to be a hit piece, but I was curious how it was going to be a hit piece. How would these people, with clearly limited resources, go about making Hunter Biden look bad in the form of a fictional narrative? I was curious, and the fact that Gina Carano, of all people, was in this really made me want to see this, because Gina Carano, once upon a time, was a huge star. So huge that she was about to get her own Star Wars spin-off series. She was a big deal. And then she made a bunch of offensive comments about trans people, and she didn't stop, and she became ostracized for it, and within a few years, this is what she had been reduced to, playing a side character in a straight-to-Breitbart movie. And the fact that such a famous figure was in this movie and was lending it even the tiniest degree of legitimacy, that was enough to convince me to see this. And I did. And before I go any further, I do need to very briefly explain what the allegations about Hunter Biden were, just because they're the basis of this movie. So, Joe Biden, the former vice president and eventual 46th president, had a son named Hunter, who had been a drug addict, who had struggled with all sorts of addictions, and done lots of unsavory things, and generally was considered a fail son. And the conspiracy theory about him that came out during the 2020 election was that Joe Biden was actually a global crime lord who had been making all of these illegal, despicable sales deals with foreign adversaries, and that he was entrusting all of these deals through his fuck-up son, of all people. And that for some reason, all the proof in the world about these sinister dealings was on Hunter's laptop. And that one day, Hunter, who was living in California, decided, I need to get this laptop repaired for some water damage. I'm going to fly to Delaware, and I'm going to hand this laptop with all this proof of my evilness on it to a random Delaware repairman who just happens to be a Trump supporter. And then I'm going to leave it and never even attempt to retrieve the laptop for some reason. Now, these allegations about Hunter's laptop were pushed heavily in the last month of the 2020 election by Donald Trump's allies in an attempt to tarnish Joe Biden, who was running against him. And the reason that these allegations didn't do jack shit and were ignored by basically everyone beyond ultra-conservative websites is because these allegations were very stupid and completely illogical once you thought about them for more than a second. It came off to most people as a blatant attempt by Trump's allies to recreate the Anthony Weiner laptop story from 2016, which actually did affect a presidential race. But just because most people moved on from this story doesn't mean the conservatives did, and they didn't. And it was from that insistence that, damn it, people must know what a horrible person Hunter Biden is, and ipso facto his father, that My Son Hunter was born. And when I watched this movie, I went in thinking that this was essentially going to be a propaganda picture, that this had been made to appeal to neutral observers or potential attainable voters, that Hunter Biden was no good. And as it turns out, that's not what this movie is at all, because in actuality, this is a very insular movie that is made specifically for the far-right audience it was being distributed to. This movie doesn't so much set out to change people's minds as much as it sets out to reconfirm the convictions of the people who already hated Hunter Biden to begin with. And as such, if you're not an alt-right conservative or extremely plugged in to the set of beliefs that people in the MAGA movement subscribe to in 2022, like if you're not familiar with the canon of conspiracy theories that people on Breitbart believed in at the time, My Son Hunter will be totally inaccessible to you. In fact, if for some ungodly reason someone watched this movie way in the future and they weren't familiar with the politics of this time, this whole movie would be totally bewildering to them, because the movie expects you to already know about all this. This movie is so inside that there's a lot of fan service in it. A lot of moments where the characters randomly reference something from out of nowhere or recite a specific talking point, and they're presented as applause lines for the people who get them. So for instance, here's a sequence that happens when Grace, the second most important character in this movie, tries to learn the truth about Hunter Biden.
I can't seem to find anything but positive stuff on the Bidens.
That's because you're using Google and the mainstream media. You have to use the alternative search engine. Here, let me show you.
You sound like an alt-right white supremacist.
Yeah, Kitty. I'm the blackface of white supremacy.
So that's like 3 talking points in just the span of 15 seconds. There's 1, Google is biased against conservatives and suppressing the truth. 2, you should use alternative search engines. And 3, being alt-right doesn't mean you're racist. How can you be racist when, look, this fictional black man shares the same views as you, so you're fine. And as if that wasn't enough coddling, the movie is a lot like The Wolf of Wall Street, and in fact, I'm sure it was directly inspired by it, because the characters will occasionally break the fourth wall and talk to the camera, interrupting the scene. And whenever any of the characters do this, they're always monologuing about how terrible Hunter Biden is, or how terrible liberals are, including the liberal characters who do this, who are like, boy, we sure are terrible people, but that's okay, because we'll never stop getting away with it. Like, I've never seen a movie that spoon feeds its target audience as much as this does. It doesn't challenge its audience for a nanosecond. Oh, and speaking of fan service, I should also note that My Son Hunter has a lot of fan service in the other sense of the definition. There's a lot of gratuitous partial nudity and sex scenes in this movie. Like, it literally opens with the Grace character, who's conveniently a stripper, giving Hunter Biden a 2-minute striptease and pole dance in which there are these very lurid close-up shots of her body. And I watched this and I was like, alright, I know what's going on here. This is for, like, the hypocrite conservatives who say that they're pro-abstinence and shit, but are actually closet sex freaks and perverts. Like, this is for them, because why else are there multiple shots in this movie of lesbians making out and Hunter Biden having sex with women? Because they're a little out of place in what is otherwise an extremely conservative movie. As for the story of My Son Hunter, there's really not much to it. So again, this is a fictional movie. It's like political fan fiction, in which, in the year 2019, as his father was running to become his party's presidential candidate, Hunter Biden goes to a party and meets a stripper named Grace and instantly falls for her. And he begins to tell her about himself and how fucked up his life has been and blah blah blah. And then, in between telling her how fucked up he is, he gets a surprise visit from none other than his father, Joe Biden. At which point they then go to a limousine and have a very long conversation about all the dastardly things they've been doing. And it's unintentionally hilarious because the guy they got to play Joe Biden doesn't look even remotely like him. Like, there's never a moment when you can even approach accepting that this guy is really Joe Biden. It's just the most preposterous casting that you'll ever see. But anyway, during their interminable familial conversation, Grace does some research about Hunter Biden and determines that he's a criminal, and then she sleeps with him in the next scene, like any good patriot would do with someone they suspected of being a national traitor. But anyway, and spoiler alert, the movie ends with Grace revealing to the world what the Bidens have been doing. And then Hunter Biden gets arrested and shouts to the heavens in anguish, and then we get a news report that Donald Trump has been reelected president in 2020. A news report that goes like this.
The numbers do not lie. President Donald Trump has won re-election by a landslide. Yes!
So yeah, my son Hunter posits an alternate universe in which Trump not only won in 2020, but won in a landslide, and that the only reason we didn't get that reality is because the evil media didn't go deeper on the Hunter Biden story and protected the Bidens and yada yada yada, you get the point. But the movie itself is not all that eventful. It's basically 3 or 4 really long scenes of Hunter Biden talking to Grace, talking to his dad, talking to Grace again, and the scenes are interspersed with flashbacks occasionally. And then you get a couple scenes of Grace talking to people, and that's it. Honestly, it's generous to even call My Son Hunter a movie at times, because there's not much of a plot to it, other than Grace learning how terrible Hunter Biden is, but still having sex with him. Here's what's interesting about this movie. This movie offers a fascinating glimpse into how alt-right MAGA conservatives, the type of people who visited Breitbart on a daily basis, viewed the world, because this movie, unintentionally, is incredibly sympathetic to Hunter Biden for almost the entirety of it. The Hunter Biden that they depict in this is a deeply troubled drug addict and alcoholic who is also dealing with mental issues and depression. All of which were actually true of Hunter Biden, although the extent to which he uses drugs in this was probably exaggerated to fit the timeline of this movie, but whatever. And in the first 30 minutes of this movie, this fictional Hunter Biden recounts all the things that really happened to him in real life, like that his mom and sister died in a car accident when he was a kid, and that the trauma from that caused him to turn to drugs, and how his other brother Bo died, and how much that fucked him up, and how he feels like he's fucked up his life, and how he's a disgrace to his family name. And I'm watching this, and I was so confused, because this movie made me like him. Like, I was expecting this to treat Hunter Biden like an unstable monster, like the world's biggest asshole or something. And yet, in this movie, he's nice, he's gentle, he doesn't do anything untoward to Grace or any other woman in this movie. All the sex acts are consensual. He's just troubled. And I was scratching my head because this movie made me feel sorry for him. There's a 10-minute stretch in this where he's recounting his life where, I swear to God, if you isolated it, you would think that it's from a pro-Hunter Biden movie that's trying to get you on his side, when it's from the exact opposite. Like, I can't stress enough that this movie was made specifically to shit on him. The people who made this disliked him enough that they made the feel-good moment of this story him getting arrested at the end in his underwear in broad daylight. Like, they hated this guy. And yet, for most of the movie, ironically, they portray him as someone who's entirely sympathetic. And I couldn't understand why this was the case until I realized that the filmmakers depicting Hunter Biden as a drug addict and sad person, that was their way of trying to make him look terrible. Like, to them, showing him being in a bad place in his life, that was them crushing him and savaging him. And it dawned on me that this was the real reason that conservatives focus so much on this dude, because they wanted to ridicule Joe Biden for having a son that was a fuck-up. Like, the reason they focused so much on Biden's son when there were so many other things they legitimately could have hammered Joe Biden on fairly was because, more than anything, they just wanted to rub Hunter Biden's situation in his father's face, to humiliate him. And so, they retrofitted this bullshit conspiracy theory around Hunter Biden's laptop as a way to justify getting to bring him up all the time. And realizing that made me sad, because what a miserable, cruel way to look at people. To look at people who are suffering and vulnerable as cudgels that you can throw in their relatives' faces to make them feel bad. And again, Hunter Biden was a public figure, and you could fairly say that he was the product of nepotism, and that he too is worthy of criticism for a lot of the things that he did that were immoral to illegal, that you can look up. But for the movie to wallow so much on his personal struggles, and to highlight those as his defining characteristics, it's gross. Even though, through sheer incompetence, they dwelled on them so much that they actually backfired and made him look likable by mistake, which is a wonderful accident. As for the rest of the movie, it's mostly awful. Some of the camera work is okay, and some of the lighting is okay, but the cheapness of this movie is so pronounced, and the writing is so dreadful, and the acting is so cheesy, that a lot of these scenes have the veneer of, like, a softcore porn flick. Like a movie that isn't really a movie. There are graphics that come up on screen every now and then, where the film tries to be extra funny and extra biting, and the graphics are so basic and so lame that they look like clip art. Like, there's a weird scene early on where Hunter Biden thinks that he's telepathically communicating with a dog, because that's how high he was. And they show thought bubbles between him and the dog, and it looks so bad. Like, this would be unacceptable in a student film. Even the captions, even the fonts that the movie uses look amateurish. Also, another way that the film tries to be funny is through wacky sound effects, which you get to hear whenever someone says something goofy. Like in this moment, when fictional Joe Biden says something inappropriate to his son.
Do you understand me, son?
Yes, sir.
Your word is abide.
My word is abide.
I want to know everything that's on that laptop that can ruin my erection. Every single detail.
Really, really top-notch stuff. Really owning the libs right there. Also, there's a dance scene in which fake Joe Biden and fake Hunter Biden dance to all the crimes they've committed, and then at the end there's a graphic that comes up that goes, this is true, it's all a fact. You know, not the most subtle film I've ever seen. I'll tell you, though, what the biggest problem with My Son Hunter is, and that is that this movie, more than anything, is really boring. Once fictional Joe Biden enters the picture, every line of dialogue from every character becomes this expository recitation of every single supposedly illegal deal that Hunter Biden made with foreign adversaries on behalf of his father. It's, he did this, and then 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 he did this, for about 50 minutes. And none of the things they claim he did are at all interesting to hear about. They're just a series of business deals. And so the movie becomes dull as dishwater. The second half of My Son Hunter is kind of like if you've ever had a conversation with someone who was really into an out there conspiracy theory and they started telling you about all the proof that they supposedly had about it, and you had no idea what they were talking about, and you thought to yourself, okay, I know that what you're saying has to be bullshit, but I also don't feel like committing myself to the hours and hours of research to rebut every fake point that you're making, so I'm just gonna kind of phase you out right now and leave you to your own beliefs because I just don't have it in me to argue with you right now. That's what the second half of this movie feels like. It's like a lecture. It's talking point after talking point after talking point. And even if it wasn't all complete nonsense, even if it was all true, even if Donald Trump and his hatchet man lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, the two least reputable people on the planet, even if they and every Trump loyalist who made this movie were telling the truth about the secrets that rested inside Hunter Biden's laptop, and that the media, literally every single media outlet other than Fox News and Breitbart, was covering it up, even if that was all true, I still wouldn't care, because as a viewer, hearing characters blather for 50 minutes about business deals isn't fun to sit through. Like, that's the other thing of this conspiracy theory. When you strip away the window dressing of Hunter Biden's drug use, which really has nothing to do with it, it just isn't interesting. For all the wacky things that happen in this movie, they don't happen frequently enough to negate the fact that after a while, the movie just isn't interesting. Although, you know, if this wasn't so hard to watch, I probably wouldn't have been tempted to watch it in the first place, so it's my own fault, but whatever. Overall, as surprising as this may sound, this cheap, pro-Trump, alt-right Breitbart movie, made exclusively by and for conservatives, isn't very good. It even fails at being a hit piece, because again, it doesn't even make Hunter Biden look that bad, all things considered. Like, if you're gonna make a movie that's based on conjecture just to mock someone, which you shouldn't because, you know, it's unethical, but if you're gonna do it, at least make it more interesting. My Son Hunter is just like the actual Hunter Biden laptop conspiracy in that it's a complete waste of everyone's time. Like, for all the time and effort that the Republicans put into trying to make this laptop story a thing, they would have been 1,000 times better served just going after Joe Biden, who was a very easy target, who had 40 years in politics that they could have honed in on fairly. But no, they couldn't resist the low-hanging fruit of exploiting Joe Biden's son's drug addiction. They couldn't let it go. They couldn't not be bullies about it. And because of that, they got stuck having to push this bonkers conspiracy theory and having to produce and support a total piece of shit film like this. My Son Hunter is a bad movie made by bad people for the dumbest, worst reasons. Which is why, even though I found it slightly more enjoyable than the last thing I reviewed, which I hate to say, I'm giving this the score that it deserves on principle. I give My Son Hunter from 2022 a woeful 1.46 out of 10. Its only redeeming quality is that it has stuff in it that you can occasionally point and laugh at, but to get to that stuff, you also have to withstand a lot of nonsense that's frankly not worth your time. Unless you're a conservative, in which case, hey, you're already wasting your time, so might as well check this out too.